Welcome to Housing for Huntsvillians, the podcast, a podcast about one couple's quest to eliminate homelessness in Huntsville by August 2026.
Sup, guys?
Hi, welcome to the pod. So today, I think that I'm going to do a thing where I go through part of the presentation that I'm going to be giving at the center in January in order to practice, and also because I think it'll be good to get this information out there. And if you want to come, you should still come.
Heck yeah.
It'll be different, and also it'll be all together. The presentation is supposed to be an hour, and it's going to be a workshop, so there'll be some interactive portions, so it'll be different in that way. And I don't really want to talk for an hour on this podcast. So, yeah, that's kind of the plan for today, and I'll go ahead and get started. So,
But just first, we will include a registration link if you do want to attend the class, and wherever we can actually include links. So website, I think we can do them on like Apple and Spotify, but I'm not 100% on that. But yeah, definitely check that out. There'll be a link. You can register there. It'll be awesome.
Yeah, if you go to huntsvilleneoliberals.com/events, you can find it on our list of upcoming events. And also, we added it to our newsletter, so be sure you're subscribed if you want to know about upcoming events. It goes out once a month or once a week, depending on... It definitely goes out once a month.
Depending on our bandwidth.
Yeah, but definitely once a month. Anyway, so today I want to talk about homelessness in Huntsville. Some of this I've probably covered, but I wanted to kind of go into it, what I've learned in the past few months kind of all together. And this is a high level overview, so we're not going to get like super into the weeds, partly because we just don't have that much information, unfortunately, about homelessness in Huntsville. But I'm going to share some of what I have. So Huntsville is home to an estimated 600 unhoused people. This is almost certainly a massive undercount of how many people are actually experiencing homelessness in Huntsville at any one time. And this number is rising. So we had a spike in homelessness in 2010. As you might expect, we were going through nationally a recession. And we were coming out of it by 2010, so that's kind of interesting. But it fell in 2011, then 2012 it fell also, spiked though not as much in 2013, fell in 2014, 2015, and 2016, stayed pretty much steady until 2019, saw a spike in 2020. It shows a spike in 2021, but I think that was problems with reporting. It was about the same in 2022, and then we've seen a big spike in 2023.
Yeah, point in time counts are, I think the one book that I was reading was describing the process, and like, I think it was New York they were using as an example, but like it was off, they estimated by as much as 50%.
That's right.
And that's an undercount, not over.
Yes, so it undercounts by as much as 50%, probably at least 20%. It also undercounts people who are sporadically or temporarily homeless and overcounts people who are chronically homeless. So that's interesting.
Yeah, and when you're talking about 20% with a number that's in the hundreds, that's a pretty substantial difference.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting to realize that how we define homelessness is very varied. And so, for example, some accounts of homelessness will include people who are doubled up with family, versus some will say, no, you're housed because you're in a dwelling. So that's an issue. I know that in Huntsville in particular, or I've heard that teachers are getting trained to be able to notice the signs of homelessness among their students. So that's obviously a worrying trend that it's so pervasive that that training is deemed necessary.
That's never a good sign.
Not a great thing. And then we also have heard from Mandy Kilgore at the Community of Hope that the United Way 211 helpline between August 2022 and August 2023, affordable housing was the number one request on that line and comprised 26% of all calls. And of those calls, 64% of those callers were on the verge of homelessness when they called. So clearly, housing in Huntsville is precarious and homelessness is a major issue and on the rise. As far as why this matters, I mean, obviously, it's not a great experience for the individuals experiencing homelessness.
Yeah.
But in addition, it matters for everyone. Homelessness is a very expensive problem. So between various grants to nonprofits and the Huntsville Housing Authority budget, which HHA is a nonprofit, it's not with the city of Huntsville, but total spending between HHA and the city of Huntsville totals at least $1 million a year fighting homelessness. But that estimate doesn't come close to the total cost of homelessness to taxpayers. So various studies estimate that the chronic homelessness costs taxpayers somewhere between $30,000 and $100,000 per person per year.
Jeez.
So that's $600,000 up to $600,000. Well, more because again, 600 is an undercount.
I feel like that's a point that a lot of people miss. It's like it doesn't matter how, even if you are the most calloused person who like has no sympathy for the homeless, like they like you should still care. Like
right.
Like
just from a selfish perspective.
Yeah. It's
an inefficient way to run a society or run a city.
Which is a dark way of putting it, but I feel like a lot of people also miss the it's like it's just because like you're not homeless doesn't it's a very multifaceted problem.
Right. And even that again is an undercount because the costs are so many and so diffuse that it's difficult to accurately quantify the cost of homelessness to a society or to a city. So, and to a country and to the world, right? So these costs include, but are not limited to, earlier deaths, more infectious diseases, earlier, longer, and more frequent hospitalizations, more frequent trips to emergency departments, higher rates of chronic and expensive to treat health conditions, including high blood pressure, diabetes, and asthma, higher rates of mental illness and substance abuse, and greater severity of symptoms. So again, not pleasant for the people going through these things. And also, these are all really expensive problems on a societal basis. Now, the negative outcomes for young children who experience homelessness include developmental delays, high levels of anxiety, poor lifetime health outcomes, inadequate preventative medical care, higher levels of emotional and behavioral problems, academic underachievement and delays, and disproportionate exposure to abuse, including sexual trauma.
Jeez.
So again, what kind of society are we running where we're allowing something to happen that has that kind of impact on children? And what are the costs of those impacts to not just those children, but our whole society? The more academic underachievement we have, the more developmental delays, the more mental illness we have, this creates problems that impact everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, we miss out on a lot of potential as a society.
Well, we have to deal with these problems, and a lot of those problems are associated with excess criminality as well, which is expensive. But in addition, again, less academic achievement, more developmental delays, for example, you're going to not be able to contribute as much to society in terms of like innovation, economic growth, shared prosperity. And because we've made poor policy choices. Anyway, so why does homelessness have these effects on people? Well, it's stressful as heck. For one, there's no door you can lock. Police are as likely to arrest you for vagrancy or whatever as to investigate crimes committed against you. People who are unhoused experience more frequent assaults and thefts. They live in constant fear. They can't sleep soundly. This fear, trauma, and sleep deprivation creates the exact kind of chronic unhealthy stress that causes a person's brain and body to break down more quickly.
And if you found your way to one of the camps, the second it gets raided, you're going to lose all your possessions.
Well, also, you're in a tent. A tent is not a locked door.
It's not a locked door. It's not secure. And you're living in constant fear of like, okay, well, other people are a problem, but what happens if there's a raid? And yeah, that just hearing about it gives me anxiety.
Right. And so in Huntsville, we have resource officers posted at the camps, but these resource officers can just decide to kick you out for whatever reason. So you also have to live in fear of that. Even if you're in a shelter, you often can't sleep due to the schedule, noise, light, or the hard surface you're having to sleep on. And there's not a lot of protection of people's belongings often in these shelters, so they often will have their belongings stolen. Also, people who are unhoused often have no safe place to properly store their medications. Let's say your medication requires refrigeration. Well, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Again, they'll often have their medication stolen, or police will throw them out in a sweep, or they'll expire due to exposure to heat and or sunlight.
I was about to say, like, we're in the South, so I mean, right now, heat's not a problem, but like most meds, like, has a cutoff around 90 degrees-ish. Like, in the summer, they're going to get exposed to way more heat than what they're supposed to. So they're either not going to work at all or be, spoiled.
And I think some medications, when they're exposed to the wrong environment, actually become dangerous.
I could totally see that. Like,
I mean, I know some, when they expire, they'll actually like cause harm if you take them after they're expired. So I would assume the same is true of storing them properly. The people who are experiencing homelessness also often have trouble bathing and keeping their wounds clean and bandaged. So when you see people sleeping on the sidewalks or in tent encampments, you'll often see higher rates of hepatitis A, for example, because it's spread by lack of proper sanitation. And hepatitis A is not good for you.
Yeah.
It's not a good time.
Putting it mildly.
And so for these reasons and more, homelessness is self-reinforcing. According to Homelessness is a Housing Problem, the longer a person experiences homelessness, the harder it is to exit. So what is the cause of homelessness? I posted a link to my talk in the Huntsville subreddit, and I found that a few people helpfully posted some myths about homelessness in the comments. So thank you so much, commenters.
Of course.
For giving me some, you never know what people think about what causes homelessness. So it's helpful to have people tell you, this is what I think. Quote, well, I agree that, and in brackets, affordable housing. Well, I agree that affordable housing would go a long way to help homelessness. It would most definitely not solve it. Most of those going into housing need support, jobs, training, work in life, treatment, substance, mental, etc. Another quote, mental health issues are the ultimate cause of homelessness. Third quote, poverty, that is the answer. People often cite disability and stagnant wages as causes of homelessness as well. So the fact is, research does show a correlation between the following individual factors and homelessness: being male, being unmarried, having low income, being older, being non-white, identifying as LGBTQIA, etc., especially among youth.
I was about to say.
Having low levels of family support, having depression, experiencing mental illness or other psychiatric disorders, using or abusing drugs and or alcohol, having a criminal record and or history of incarceration. So all of these factors can and do contribute to homelessness at the level of the individual. But, and this is the important thing to understand, none of these individual factors can be the main cause of homelessness, nor can all the factors combined explain homelessness. That's because none of these factors correlates with the rates of homelessness. So we all know that correlation is not causation. Wearing a jacket is correlated with dropping temperatures, but I can't make it colder outside by wearing a jacket. Thus, you can have correlation without causation, but you cannot have causation without correlation. If two things don't have a relationship, then they obviously can't have a causal relationship. So let's look at the relationship between each of these individual risk factors and rates of homelessness. Unemployment / underemployment. According to a 2021 University of Chicago study, 53% of people living in homeless shelters and 40% of unsheltered people were employed. A more recent California study found 40% of unhoused individuals were engaged in paid work. Comparing cities across the U.S., there is no connection between employment and homelessness rates.
If anything, it's harder to keep a job, but people still do regardless.
Right. So if nearly half to more than half of unhoused people are employed, how could unemployment be causing homelessness? 1. 2, how can unemployment be causing homelessness when there's no connection between a city's rate of employment and its rate of homelessness?
Yeah.
If unemployment were causing homelessness, you would see a connection between states and cities that have higher rates of unemployment and cities and states that have higher rates of homelessness. That connection doesn't exist. So that cannot be the cause or even a cause. Again, it is on an individual level. It is not on a systemic population level. All right, let's look at severe mental illness, addiction, and disability. So most people experiencing homeless don't have addiction or mental illness, and most people suffering from addiction and or serious mental illness do not become homeless.
Yeah, and a lot of people that do have addiction, it generally comes from the stress of being homeless. If like you happen to be homeless, and
yeah,
right,
it works both ways. So having a mental illness or a drug addiction makes you more likely to become homeless, and being homeless makes you more likely to either develop or worsen a mental illness or an addiction problem. But at the very most, 40% of unhoused people have a substance use disorder. So how can substance abuse be causing homelessness when it's not impacting most people experiencing homelessness? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's among the individual population experiencing homelessness. It doesn't include families who are unhoused. So that's actually probably an exaggerated percentage. You know, and even at that rate, it's only 3 times higher than the U.S. population. 7.4% of the U.S. population has some kind of substance use disorder. So that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So when you look at states, comparing states, substance use and illicit drug use explain just 6% of the variation in rates of homelessness. So yeah, drug use and dependency are not related to overall levels of homelessness. And again, if it's not related, it can't be causal. There's no correlation between a state's rates of severe mental illness and or disability and the rates of homelessness. California is home to 30% of all people experiencing homelessness in the U.S. and 50% of those experiencing unsheltered homelessness in the U.S. But California is actually better than a lot of states when it comes to mental illness and substance use. States with the highest rates of mental health and substance use problems, states like West Virginia, cough, cough, Alabama, have some of the lowest rates of homelessness. All right, fine. Let's look at poverty. So most of the time there's no connection. Poverty, it's actually opposite. So cities with less poverty tend to have more homelessness than cities with more poverty. Quote, homelessness is a housing problem. At the level of the city, homelessness thrives amid affluence, not poverty. So poverty is not causing rates of homelessness. Poverty is associated with homelessness at the individual level, but poverty is not the cause of homelessness on a systemic rate level.
Huh.
All right, fine, stagnant wages. So cities with higher median wages actually also tend to have lower rates of homelessness than cities with lower median wages. This one I hear all the time from well-meaning progressives, and I'm like, I am also upset about stagnant wages and poverty and mental illness. Like, I think all of these are bad things that we should do something about, but we don't have to misrepresent reality in terms of whether they're causing homelessness to make an argument for dealing with these as problems. The reality is, yes, wages are, well, economists disagree, but there's evidence to indicate wages have stagnated for the bottom half of earners since 1970. But guess what housing prices have done? They've increased 1,600, not 16,000. That would be wild.
1,600 is
1,608% since 1970.
Jesus.
Almost 1,000% faster than inflation generally. So, yeah, wages should increase. Should they increase 1,600%?
Or should housing become more freaking affordable?
Yeah, or should we not have allowed housing to outpace inflation by 1,000%? I don't know. So yeah, a lack of affordable housing is the number one cause of homelessness in the U.S., and there's absolutely no reason to believe that Huntsville is any different. So again, there's a strong consensus among most researchers who study the cause of homelessness that the cost of housing is by far the biggest contributor to rising rates of homelessness. So yeah, I could go through the studies, but well, sure, why not? Okay, so there's I link a bunch of them in the notes, but I can't see them on my phone very easily, but we'll include it in the show notes if you want to actually see the notes, check out the studies, and you should. But I'm going to talk about the landmark report that came out earlier this year from the Benioff Homelessness and Housing Initiative at the University of California, San Francisco, which was the single deepest study on homelessness in America in decades. It is the largest representative study of homelessness since the mid-90s, and is the first large-scale representative study to use mixed methods. So they use surveys and in-depth interviews to find out what they found. And I'm going to quote the authors of that study. High housing costs left participants vulnerable to homelessness. While participants faced many barriers to returning to housing, the primary one was cost. Cost. It's the prices. Again, quoting Homelessness is a Housing Problem, quote, virtually every study of intercommunity variation in homelessness rates identifies rent costs as a significant predictor of homelessness, end quote. And this is something that Mike pointed out in our interview with him, but he pointed to at least 3 studies which connect a 1% increase in median rent to an increase in rates of homelessness. The first study found a 1% increase in the rate of homelessness. Another study found a 0.9% rise in the rate of homelessness. And the third study found a 0.9 to a 1.2% rise in the rate of homelessness. So if you look at the data, it doesn't look like Huntsville is exceptional in any way. We see both housing prices and the number of unhoused individuals both began to rise around 2016. So I think I'm going to end it there. That's a good amount of data and information to get through.
Seems like a lot of good stuff to process.
Mm-hmm. And anyone who wants to claim that somehow Huntsville is exceptional, I would love to see the data.
Yeah, at least exceptional in the case of homeless.
Right. So, if you want to say, well, yeah, all these studies of the nation show that housing costs are the number one contributor to homelessness, but in Huntsville, it's different. Well, why are you, based on what? I would love to know.
Yeah.
Because I don't see any reason to believe that.
Feel free to get in touch. I don't know if we have a contact form on H4H, but definitely one on Huntsville New Liberals. So reach out.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate the care on this topic and concern. And yeah.
And definitely check out the event on HuntsvilleNewLiberals.com, which we will also link to in the show notes. But yeah, come out in January and actually attend the class.
And if you are listening to this the day it comes out, come to our holiday party on Thursday.
Yes. Thursday, Mad Malts at from 6 to 8 p.m.
6 to 8 p.m.
Free food, free beer, and a lot of good people. So check it out.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to Housing for Huntsvillians. This podcast is a project of Huntsville New Liberals. Sign up for our newsletter and RSVP to our monthly happy hour at HuntsvilleNewLiberals.com.